as you could see, New Mexico and New Mexicans appreciate a good story. So our first little round robin with the panelists is going to be to let them tell you a short, very brief story about their work, because the other thing we know in New Mexico is that even though we leaders get to be the face of the work, there's a whole team that does the work, and so this is their opportunity each to brag on the work of their respective organizations before we jump into the real subject of the panel today. So I'm gonna start immediately to my right with Zane. Zane is the Executive Director of the Native American Community Academy and a proud member of the Chippewa Cree tribe. Zane, will you tell, Zane Rosette, forgive me, will you tell us a little bit about your organization?
For sure. Tansei ni wakamaganak Zane Rosette Nasigasun Anishinaabe Nehio. Good morning, relatives. My name is Zane Rosette. I'm Chippewa and Cree, serving as the Executive Director of the Native American Community Academy. For those of you that don't know, we refer to it as NACA. NACA is a K-12 charter school that was birthed in 2006, basically from the community, at a time where test scores were looked at in a way that put a deficit-minded lens on our community, our indigenous community. And at the time the community came together, well, we have to do something, what can we do? And so out of that came the idea of NACA. And out of NACA came 3 pillars of a mission. Parents wanted a school that prepared our students academically, also ensured that their identity is sound, and that they are holistically well. That sounds simple enough, but ultimately we know throughout our time in public education that we're not fulfilling some of those obligations just as communities, and we're always trying to get better. So our community here in Albuquerque decided to do that differently, and came the school where we try to actively engage our families. We try to bring culture into the school, not teach culture, but use culture as a mechanism to excite our students, to empower them to see themselves throughout the community walls of NACA. Right now we have 2 campuses, a K-8 campus, and if you are exploring Albuquerque, our main campus is down by the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. You may visit it during your time here and take a short trip down the road from there. You can see our main campus, which is actually the last remaining Albuquerque Indian boarding school that is still standing. So we repurposed that to reimagine education of what it means for our community, and we're actively doing that by teaching 5 indigenous languages at our school. We also offer Spanish because a number of our indigenous families believe, you know what, we do a good job of teaching our language at home. We want our students prepared for the future, and so let's offer Spanish. So we try to accommodate our community's wishes. So we are always trying to evolve and understand our community's needs and wants and try to fill those the best way that we can. We have about 450 students. We're looking to expand and grow continually, always marketing and trying to reach out to the greater community. NACA is a free and public charter. We got kids of all backgrounds at NACA. They're all welcome, and we believe our pillar hits home to families that are looking for a small community where you are seen, you are known. We operate on a first name basis, an open door policy, and we like to get to know people so that we're better serving our community and understanding that, you know what, we're in this for the long haul together, and we're working to meet goals that we set together. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here and share with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Zane. Yeah. Take him up on that offer to go visit NACA. My next panelist that I will brag on here is Adrian Pedrosa, who is the National Executive Director of Abriendo Puertas, Opening Doors, and a former President Obama appointee to the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for Hispanics. And Adrian, I'll let you brag on your work and your team.
Thank you, Hakeem. Bienvenidos a todos aquí a Albuquerque. It gives me great pleasure to see children's museums here today. I represent an organization, APOD, or Abriendo Puertas, Opening Doors, that works with communities across the country to invest in children and families, and as parents, as their child's first teachers and advocates. And many of our communities that we work with throughout the country, we have 3,000 facilitators, depend and work with children's museums as a part of the ecosystem in their community. We work through a lens of popular education around early childhood development, investing in the idea that parents and caregivers are the experts of what their children need, and that when we invest in their strengths, in their language, in their culture, in their experiences, that they will be the best first teachers of their children. And you all as children's museums, we know because we hear these stories, are a part of that. We encourage families and children to partner with local resources, with local children's museums, to ensure that their children have access to resource, to hands-on education. And one of the primary things we hear about, because we work in the early childhood space, is the importance of playing and learning for children, and having access to be able to interact, right, in the wonderful spaces that you all create, that you all build for them, is just a treasure for many of the families that we work with throughout the country. Here in New Mexico, we're honored to partner with a local organization, Partnership for Community Action, that has over 300 facilitators in rural and urban parts of the state who facilitate Abriendo Puertas, opening doors, to ensure that parents and caregivers have the space, the peer support, the ability to interact with their fellow parents about what their children's hopes, dreams, and aspirations are. And we're excited that you all are here to see the ecosystem that exists here in New Mexico. And we hope to connect with you wherever you are here in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. And on the far end of the panel, hey, all the way down there, hi, Katrin. My friend Katrin Allred is here to talk about the work of her team she serves as the director of the Early Childhood Center of Excellence at Santa Fe Community College.
Thank you so much. So our story actually started 10 years ago. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary of the Early Childhood Center of Excellence. We call it ECHO at Santa Fe Community College. And we really value being a part of a community college and hold that really close, that piece of community in the work that we do. And as we've grown over these past 10 years, we've also grown in our mission. And one of the core values that we hold in our mission is two-generation or multi-generation approaches. And I know that in talking to children's museum folks, you get that. But it's actually a lot harder than you would think, because oftentimes we are focusing programs only at parents or just trying to help those kids. But when you take a multi-generation approach, you're really taking an approach for generational change. And that's what we're really focused on at ECHO. And so under that big ECHO umbrella, we serve the full early childhood ecosystem. We have a 5-star bilingual early learning center that serves 128 children, 2 months to 5 years, and their families. We also are a model office for the Firstborn and More home visiting program. And for those of you who aren't familiar with home visiting, it's the guidebook that everyone tells you doesn't exist for parenting, to have someone come and support you through that journey. We support programs in 18 counties in New Mexico that serve over 2,000 families every year. We also hold the state's first educational apprenticeship called Aprende, and it is to help build and strengthen the early childhood workforce. And through all of that, we really hold our workforce close. Early childhood educators do not get the recognition that they deserve, and so everything we are doing is to elevate and support them. So we do extensive training and learning. But one of the things we've really been leaning into in our work in this two-generation approach is how do we support student parents in higher education? We did a survey here in New Mexico of about 9 community colleges and found that 33% of the students in community college are parents. And so for us, if we can help support parents in that economic mobility, building social capital, we're also making sure that their kids are in high quality learning. That's how we're creating that generational change.
That's fantastic. And hold on to the mic, Katrin, because I'm coming back to you. But you guys can clap for Katrin Allred and the amazing work that's happening at Santa Fe Community College. We wanted to give you a sense of not just the reach of the work of the panel, because we're a vast state. We're not so necessarily vast on population, but certainly vast in geography. And so to be able to reach all four corners, as we say, of the state, these are critical supports in that infrastructure. And later in the panel, we'll talk a little bit about, how they do report cards on states and grades and all the needs assessments. And though the need is great in New Mexico, it is partners like these and Explora that make sure that we're delivering on the promise that Dr. Sanchez talked about to our children in this community. So moving into the main course of our panel, and starting with you, Katrin. All the organizations up here serve to support New Mexico children and families and the ecosystem that supports them. What elements do you feel are most essential to this thriving ecosystem that centers children and families?
So I think when we're talking about the ecosystem, you guys probably have that image in your head of those concentric circles, right? We're moving from the micro to the macro level. But always holding that center piece, which is the family and the child. And what we do as a society is we tend to sort of build these systems that connect all of these other pieces, but sometimes systems end up serving themselves instead of holding that North Star of what families and children need. And so here in New Mexico, we really struggled with that for quite a while. And it wasn't until 2020 when we started the Early Childhood Education and Care Department, ECECD, that we pulled programs out of 3 different cabinet secretaries, put them all in one place so that we could really design a system with that North Star of supporting children and families. But to do that, we had to do a lot of work ahead of time. My colleagues sitting next to me being some of the people that did that work to find the investment for that. And so we were able to tap into our land grant fund, which is mostly supported with oil and gas revenue, and also create an early childhood trust fund at the state level. And that gave us that capital infusion to create the system that we wanted. And so while many of you have probably heard about the early childhood system in New Mexico and what's happened over the past 5 years, I think it's really important to remember that it's been 5 years. Before that, we were all just scrapping it together as community. And so what we've been able to do with that investment is create universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. We have child care assistance, which is free child care for families making up to $120,000 a year. Yes, please.
Yeah.
77% of the families at our center are eligible for that free child care. And on top of that, they created free college through the New Mexico Opportunity Scholarship. And so what we've done in New Mexico, whether I don't know if they realized it or not, is create this 2-generation policy where we have free college, free childcare, and we really have that North Star of centering families and children. And so I think, we're working hard to make the systems work for us when we're thinking about that ecosystem of early childhood.
Thank you, Katrin. Adrian, what other critical pieces of this ecosystem would you offer for the audience?
Yeah, I think Katrin hit on some very key pieces of this ecosystem, and I want to focus on one piece because I heard both Arthur and Marilyn in their remarks talk about the commitment and the importance of advocacy, right? And Katrin's story is built on over a decade of advocacy for this constitutional amendment that passed in 2022 to create a constitutional right for families in New Mexico to an early childhood education. That is funded, right? Putting budget and resources to that. And the advocacy that took place over this decade and even longer, but a decade on specifically this piece of legislation, was really led by parents, families, caregivers, and institutional partners, including children's museums, including higher ed departments and childcare providers and nonprofits and faith-based organizations and businesses, right? It took that type of coalition to join together to advocate, to say we are going to prioritize and we're going to have a long-term vision to ensure that our children and families have access to high-quality early childhood education, because we know it will make a difference for the rest of that child's life. We know what that investment early on in the first 3 years of a child's life, in the first 5 years, what type of investment it makes in the architecture of their brain and the ability for that family, right, to have their whole needs met, including early childhood services starting prenatally. And so the investment that we saw made in advocacy efforts from foundations, from institutions, into parent leaders, right? And so when we talk about advocacy, it starts, we believe, at Abriendo Puertas, Opening Doors. It starts with your child. It starts at home. It starts being, right, that parent, that caregiver that plays with them, that interacts with them, that has that nurturing environment, and that advocates for them as they start engaging in educational institutions, right? And then from there, it builds to advocacy in the community, at their preschool, at the community, at the state level. And we saw parents and caregivers starting that advocacy, becoming aware of the importance of their role at home, and then going to the state legislature, right, over a 10-year period, together with allies, together with institutions, and saying, we believe that our children, that our families are worth this investment, and we're gonna fight for it in the long haul. There's a lot of smaller stories in between, a lot of great articles that have been written about this journey, this path, but what's exciting, right, is to hear that your leaders, that you all have this commitment to advocacy in your communities, and you have a commitment because you believe that families and children are worth investing in.
To add to what Katrin and Adrian just shared from your resident law school panelists, all of your states, all 50 states, have some provision in their state constitution for the education of children, and how you operationalize that to turn it into money is something that I think is where advocacy could be well spent. So, Zane, will you add to our ecosystem here? What would you lift up as something that's critical to an ecosystem that supports children and families?
I would definitely go back to the 3 pillars that are mentioned at the start that we try to hit on at NACA is, the academic preparation of our students. Our families want them to go to college, have access to college. The second one being secure in their identity, and the third one being holistically well. So if we're talking about advocacy, we definitely want our students to advocate for themselves on the holistically well side. At NACA, what we do, we call it our wellness wheel. Bi-weekly, our students are self-assessing themselves, and in these quadrants of the wellness wheel, it's basically all of them self-included. Their physical, their mental, their social, their community. They're assessing themselves on a 1 through 10 scale. And they're setting goals in those classrooms with their teachers, their advisors, and then come parent-teacher conferences quarterly, they're explaining that to their parents. So the goal and the idea is we want these conversations to start trickling out into our families. With our student support team, that's where our school counselors and social workers live within the NACA community. They're in classrooms, they have parent group meetings in the evenings to also enforce and prepare families for these discussions so that our children and our families and community are advocating for just the overall well-being of themselves. We definitely want our students to be healthy, we want our families to be healthy, and we want to be aware of that as a school community, and that allows us to work with our partners to drive initiatives to ensure, like, we're providing better access, we're providing more well-rounded support for that need that we're seeing out there in our community.
Thank you so much, Zane. And I'm going to move us towards our final question for the panel, more about what you're excited about next, right, in your work. But I'd like to tie it to a question that we're not going to get to, right, around how placemaking and community making is something that's central not only to New Mexicans, but I would say in all of our communities that are represented in here. So as you think about what work of yours that you're most excited about, how does that work contribute to community making and placemaking, and what role do children in museums play in that?
Yeah, for sure. So ultimately at NACA, we started, it's called our Land-Based Healing and Learning Team. It's a department at NACA full of educators that is building capacity within our teaching staff to get them to understand that learning does not happen within just four walls of the classroom. Learning in a cultural sense has happened since time immemorial in our communities. And we've had scientists, engineers, lawyers in our communities. What were those skill sets they used outside of four-walled classrooms? So the goal of this team is to get our teachers empowered to set up these learning experiences, adventures, and that's where key partners like Explora come in. They come in, we go to Explora, they offer times for schools to come in, offer free memberships to family, provide access. And through our partnership with Explora, they also come into our out-of-school time programming and hands-on learning with our children. At NACA, we offer free after-school care for all of our students. And that's probably one of our most popular areas is the hands-on. Our kids want to be out of this traditional desk, seat time. They want to learn, but the old model needs some tweaking. And so right now with our Land-Based Healing and Learning Team, and our partners like Explora, we're trying to take some chances right now. We're trying to assess it to see what kind of improvements it has on attendance, behavior, academics, so that we could further drive that initiative and expand it even more.
I love that. They want to learn standing up. Help these children learn standing up. Adrian, please talk about what's exciting next in your work and how it connects to community and placemaking.
You know, I'm excited to see what our communities are doubling down on right now, right? To hear Arthur talk about, we're doubling down on diversity, equity, inclusion, and advocacy, right? To hear nonprofit organizations say, we're gonna double down on our reach with families, on our service to families, on partnering, right? On what we can do in our local communities to ensure that our families have access to resources, that we're maybe having to rebuild some institutions, right? Some systems that we're losing funding, but it's okay. We're gonna go here, we're gonna go to philanthropy, we're gonna go to our state, city partners, our county partners, to the private sector, right? What I'm excited about at Abriendo Puertas, Opening Doors, is we're doing the same. We're gonna release a new 4th edition of our curriculum where we're doubling down on the inclusiveness of our work with families and children. Traditionally we were built by and for Latino families, but we're seeing communities across the country that are using our approach, that are implementing with immigrant families across different origins, countries of origin. And so we're doubling down on that the same way that I hear your organizations are doubling down. And so the sense of solidarity, that we're not gonna sit down, we're not gonna lie down and allow things to happen to us, we're gonna step up, we're gonna lean in, and we're gonna think about what the future that we're gonna build together is going to look like. That's what's exciting to me, to know that, you know, to feel that sense of hope, and to see you all here, and you're gonna go to Explore, and you're gonna see the importance of place and how they built place New Mexico into their exhibitions of water, of land, and you all are building that same sense of place in your museums so your families could feel that sense of belonging, right? That sense of equity, so they see themselves, their place in the museums that they're interacting with.
Agreed. Third spaces of belonging are going to be so much more critical in the next 3.5 years. Katrin, what are you most excited about your work next and that notion of community in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think really building on what you both said is belonging. I mean, we've seen the reports that parents are feeling really isolated and alone. And we know this from our work with families and from student parents on college campuses, is that they don't feel that support. And so how do we build belonging into what we do. And that third space of our partnerships with children's museums, I could gush on and on for hours. Every single one of those programs that I listed in the beginning has partnered with our children's museums across New Mexico. And coming to our campus, the Santa Fe Children's Museum offers a story time in our library. They have STEM kits that our families can check out. Explora co-developed a science class for preschool teachers with us. They also come to our campus to do Growing a Scientist with families. And it's that out of school time, third space, joyful learning, that's what families want to show up for. And so in those partnerships, that's how we're building community and creating belonging in our communities. And I think just in a time of where everything's breaking, there's so many opportunities for us to intensely lean in on each other. And that's the part that I'm excited about. Maybe in the past, we've all been able to sort of do our work and just trudge along, but that's not going to be possible. And so how do we reimagine what really intensive partnerships and really deep community partnerships look like? And I really see children's museums, because anytime I go to them, the answer is always yes. And that's not true of many other partners. And so as long as we continue to say yes to each other and figure out ways to build belonging, build relationships, and build community, that's where I see the vision for us to move forward.
Thank you so much for that, Katrin. I am reminded in some of our calls prior to this, actually more, I think it was more just a call talking to Kristen. I was talking about how excited I was to be here because being born and raised in Philadelphia, it was very likely that the Franklin Institute or the Please Touch Museum would be here. So shout out to my folks if they're in the room. And that notion of things breaking in society and having third spaces for young people where they are more than welcome to come in and touch and possibly break stuff is so much more important. So we want to thank you for the work you do. I want to leave us with something that Dr. Sanchez said earlier that I think could be our rallying cry for the rest of the conference. We need to consider our collective commitment to prioritizing children's right to playful learning and a safe and equitable future. So there's your rallying cry, and I look forward to seeing you around the conference.